Hi, I'm Kay Lemon, Executive Director at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, nonprofit MSI serves as the bridge between marketing theory and business practice, and our goal is to move the needle on significant marketing problems. We do this by funding research by leading academics worldwide on topics voted by our 70-plus corporate sponsors and disseminating that research through members-only events and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. First, I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have for Tami during the presentation. We'll gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Tami Kim is a doctoral student at the Harvard Business School. I'm very excited to have Tami present, and I told her I was going to say this. She's the first ever doctoral candidate that we have asked to present in the MSI webinar series. I met Tami and I heard her talk at the Herring Symposium for doctoral students at Indiana University. I was so impressed, I asked her to present this webinar to share her insights because I think that they'll be really valuable for the MSI community. Tami's research focuses on the notion of implicit contracts, a set of practices that individuals expect others to follow in the absence of explicit promises, and focusing on how such contracts develop between consumers and firms and how violations of such contracts manifest. She uses several research methodologies ranging from in-lab experiments to field experiments to audit studies, and has worked with several outside organizations and companies to implement her ideas. She graduated from Harvard with an AB in government and also has work experience in consulting and political campaigns. Tami, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing about your research.
Great. Thank you so much, Kay. And thank you to everyone who has joined in today. I'm delighted to be here and to share some of my work with you today. So what I'll be talking to you today is about transparency, specifically about how it can be used in business context to improve consumer and employee experiences. Given that in the spirit of being transparent, allow me to first introduce you to my amazing co-authors, Ryan Beal, who is at Harvard Business School, and also Chia Jung-se, who is at University College London. We've known one another for a very long time, and this idea came just as we were sharing about our dining experiences and the ways in which we experience things as consumers when we're going to restaurants and such. So before I delve into the actual research question and today's topic, allow me to first go through a scenario with you. So for some of us, it's already lunchtime. So let us suppose that you're feeling like getting a burger. And so in order to get this burger, you walk into a local restaurant. So in a traditional dining setting, this is what you as a customer would experience. You'll place your order. You'll wait while your food is being made in the kitchen. And you'll receive the food from wait staff once the food is actually made. Now, if you are a chef who's working at this restaurant, this is what you would experience as a chef. You're inside the kitchen. Somebody will bring the customer's order to you, and then you'll make the food inside the kitchen. And then finally, once the food is ready, you will hand the food to a wait staff, who will then bring the food out to customers. So what this means is that there's a physical wall that is between the customer and the chef, preventing them from seeing one another, as well as from interacting with one another. So now let us imagine an alternate scenario in which we break down the wall and allow consumers and chefs to be able to see one another. In fact, an increasing number of companies is making their behind-the-scenes operations transparent to consumers. So you may know several of these examples already. Domino's, for example, has introduced many online features that allows consumers to find out more about their operations. They can track what stage their pizza is at, what the name of the person delivering your pizza is, And also in some locations, you can even watch your pizza being made through a live stream video. If you are a Krispy Kreme fan, you may know that in many of their stores are designed in a way that allows customers to watch the donut making process, as well as seeing the people who are making these donuts. And finally, Benihana is just one example of many open kitchen restaurants that are out there in which consumers can dine while watching their food being made in front of them. And in all of these food service environments, there's transparency between two parties. Between those who are putting in labor to create a certain output, and also those who are receiving and consuming this output. And in fact, there has been a growing number of open kitchen designs from fast food chains such as Subway and Chipotle to high-end restaurants. Now, so in observing these trends, the question that we were interested in asking is the following. How does transparency affect service outcomes in face-to-face business settings? Specifically, we wondered, how does transparency affect consumer perceptions? And also, does it influence the way that employees work and perform? And this is an important question given its potential economic impact. So in the U.S. alone in 2015, there was over 1 million restaurants that consumers could go to, which resulted in over $700 billion in sales last year. And this number has been growing exponentially year by year. But given this huge size of restaurant industry, and also a growing trend of open kitchen design, past research on various types of transparent practices gives us unclear answer on whether the growing trend of transparency is a good thing or a bad thing. So let us first consider potential negative outcomes that transparent design could introduce. First, by making operations transparent to consumers, companies may fear that introducing transparency can reduce operating efficiency. Perhaps transparent designs can serve as distractions for employees. Transparent designs may also create more opportunities for customers to recognize potential areas of improvement. So they may be able to pinpoint the things that they didn't like or don't like about specific ways in which they're delivering their food, or the ways in which their operations work. And this type of transparency may dampen their perceptions of the company. And also, by opening operations up to customers, employees may have to face misbehaving customers, which could then have consequences for their employee morale. But there may also be positive outcomes that can be generated from transparent designs. So knowing about the labor can enhance how we perceive outcome quality. Getting more insight into product development can instill this sense of loyalty and ownership over the final outcome. And also, we know from the past research that people rely heavily on visual information to make certain evaluations. So in our research, what we're interested in studying is exploring the effects of transparency on customers and employees in a face-to-face service setting, seeing how introducing transparency may introduce positive and or negative outcomes. So before I delve into our findings, I'd like to take a moment to explain how we typically test our predictions in our research. So many of you may be familiar with the term randomized control trials or randomized experiments. This is a methodology that is typically used to cleanly test the effectiveness of a particular intervention. So when designed right, it can be a powerful way of showing whether things that you're interested in studying, such as your new marketing campaign or a new consumer interface, can actually generate positive or negative outcomes. So let me just give you a little more background on how these experiments work. So randomized controlled trials or randomized experiments work by randomly assigning people to intervention groups or a control group, or what's typically called baseline group. This is done while keeping everything else about the environment constant. So what this allows us to do is to measure the impact of interventions on relevant outcomes, and also allows us to establish causality, given that we're holding everything else constant and only changing one aspect that we're interested in seeing the effects of. And also these designs, when done right, allow us to minimize bias that may be introduced in any sort of business environments or things that we can test in the real world. So for example, if we're interested in testing the effect of transparency on consumer satisfaction, what would happen is we recruit participants, randomly assign them to be either in the no transparency group or the transparency group, measuring things like consumer satisfaction and their perceptions of the company, and see if there's any difference across the two conditions. So sometimes we would have participants experience both conditions in random order, measuring satisfaction after they go through each condition. So the methodologies that we employ in our research are variations of this structure, with the goal of examining the causal impact that transparency has on firm relevant outcomes. So I'll be sharing with you 4 sets of data today to unpack the effect of transparency on consumer and employee behavior. First 2 studies are what we call field experiments, and they're conducted in 2 different cafeterias. And the last 2 studies were done in a more controlled environment online by having people go through simulated dining experiences online. So first, to test this, we found a dining hall where we could run a field study for 2 weeks. So this is our field setting. This dining hall featured a grill station where customers could get custom-made to order items. So that's the grill station right there, with a place where you can fill out an order form. So customers may go up to the grill station and fill out an order form such as this. They could order things like tofu dog, garden burger, grilled chicken, and also different ways in which you wanted your eggs to be done. So more specifically, what would happen is consumer could fill out this order form and hand it to an employee, who will then pass this order form through a tiny window through the wall to the kitchen staff. Then the kitchen staff will receive this order form, make the food, and then pass back the completed dish through the tiny window from which an employee would take that complete dish and pass it on to consumers. So in this setting, there's an actual wall that's standing between the chef and customers. And because we couldn't actually break down the wall between the chefs and customers, we instead installed 2 iPads, one in the kitchen and one by the order station. And what this allowed us to do is, by using the iPad's video conferencing software, and vary the degree of transparency. So sometimes we turned one side on and one side off, vice versa, or sometimes we turned both sides on such that customers and chefs could see one another. And importantly, we turned off the audio for both iPads to make transparency strictly visual. So in sum, this allowed us to implement 4 types of interventions. First, in the blind condition, we turned both iPads off such that neither customers nor chefs could see one another. In the chef sees customer condition, we only turned the iPad on for the chef so that they could see customers who were taking their food and submitting their orders, but customers could not see the chef's back. In the customer sees chef's condition, customers could see the chef because we had turned the iPad on for customers, but chefs could not reciprocate. So again, this is another form of one-sided transparency. Finally, in the reciprocal transparency condition, we turned both iPads on such that both chefs and customers could see one another during lunch and dinner times. There's a little more details about the study. The study was run across 2 weeks during lunch and dinner shifts. And we didn't run our study during the weekend. So this was run over basically 10 days. Our participants were customers who were making their orders at this order grill station, and also 11 chefs who were working in the kitchen. So the way in which their schedules worked was that they were always assigned to one of 2 shifts, lunch or dinner, day by day. And this helped us to figure out which intervention to implement during each lunch or dinner shift. So while we were running this study, there were a few ways in which we measured our outcomes that we're interested in. During the 2-week period, we had research assistants survey customers in the dining area who had used the grill station. So in the survey, they asked the questions included things, demographic questions like their gender and their age, and also perceptions of value about their grill station. So these items included the grill station, things like the grill station provides a service I want to use. This is a high quality service, and also asked about their willingness to pay to use the grill station. The food quality we asked with a question, how satisfied are you with the food that you're getting? Finally, we also had a research assistant sitting inside the kitchen. So during this time, while the chefs were making the food, this research assistant measured how fast the chefs took to process each item. So let us look at some results. First, I will be looking at consumer perceptions of the service that they experienced. So this is the impact of condition on the composite measure of the 4-item perceived value questions. So first, compared to those in the blind condition, those in the customer sees chef condition, or those in the chef sees customer conditions, they don't report significantly different ratings of perceived value compared to those in the blind conditions. But what you will see is that when we turn the iPads on for both sides, customers reported significantly higher perceptions of value about the service that they have gotten compared to the rest of the conditions. So what this means is that customers were more satisfied with the service experience, they're more likely to recommend to a friend, and also more willing to pay to use this service. So now let's see how chefs performed in terms of food quality. So again, this is the impact of condition on the perceptions of food quality that participants had responded to. So you'll see that compared to those in the blind condition, those in the customer sees chef condition didn't report significantly different perceptions of food quality. But what you will see is that when chefs were able to see customers, but customers could not. So this is a case in which customers were not aware that they were being observed by chefs. They actually reported food to be better tasting. So what this means is, in other words, is that when chefs were able to see customers, they actually were motivated to make better tasting food. What's even more important is that when we turned iPads on for both sides, we see an even bigger boost in that customers reported the food to be way better tasting when the food was made during the time when both iPads were turned on. So of course, it would also be important to know if creating a better tasting food was actually compromising efficiency. So quality and efficiency would be 2 important factors that we should consider. So here we're looking at the impact of condition on average throughput time. So this is how fast chefs were making each order. So compared to those in the blind condition, again, we see no difference when customers were able to see the chefs or when chefs were able to see customers on the speed at which chefs were making these food items. But what is important is that we actually see a huge drop when the iPads were turned on for both chefs and customers, such that when the iPads were both turned on in the reciprocal transparency case, chefs were making their food at a way faster pace while also making a better tasting food. And this drop is a 19.2% reduction in throughput times, improving the efficiency at which they were performing. So in this study, we found that allowing customers and employees to see one another increased customer perceptions of service value and also increased employee performance in terms of food quality as well as work speed. But since there was variation in food quality, we wanted to explore these effects further by holding the final product constant. To do so, we use pre-made products and only vary the way in which consumers retrieve these products. So in the next study, we'll be looking at pre-made products. So for this, we found another cafeteria to run this experiment. We recruited customers at a sandwich station and promised them a free sandwich for the next day in exchange for their participation in our study. Give you a little more details. This study was run across 2 days. In that first day, when they were being recruited, they filled out a survey about that day's order that they had, about their experiences with the sandwich station. Then they placed an order for the following day, specifying what type of sandwich they wanted to get for free. Then we gave them instructions for picking up their pre-ordered sandwich. The next day, when participants or these customers arrived at the dining station, they picked up their sandwich following the instructions given. And after lunchtime, we emailed surveys for them to fill out after that day's lunch experience. So this is how the set of instructions varied depending on which intervention case they were assigned to. So first, if you were assigned to a blind condition, participants, when they checked in with a research assistant at the entrance of the dining hall, they were directed to go straight to a sandwich cooler in which they retrieved their sandwich that had been made for them, and then went through the cashier scan. There was one more step involved for those in the transparency condition. So for those in the transparency condition, after they checked in with a research assistant near the entrance, they were directed to wait in line at the sandwich counter at which sandwiches were actually being made. After they went through this motion of going through the line, then they were directed to go to the sandwich cooler where they picked up their sandwich and also exited through cashier scan. So the results that I'll be showing you are maybe a little complicated, but so this is a set of regressions that we have run to study the effect of transparency. So the first line or the first row is the important thing to look at. First, when we look at people's the ways in which people report their perceptions of food quality, we see that there's no difference whether they were in the blind condition or the transparency condition. Now, this is not surprising given that all participants that participated in this study received exactly the same sandwich. They were all pre-made beforehand. What is surprising is that for those in the transparency condition, when they were asked to actually go through the line before retrieving their pre-made sandwich, they reported higher perceptions of value about the sandwich station that they had just experienced. So this means that they're more willing to pay for the service, they were more satisfied and also more willing to recommend to their friends. So now going back to the results that I've shown you so far, after we received this, we were pretty shocked at how big of a difference we consistently kept seeing whenever consumers experience transparent designs. So then we wondered what drives these effects. For consumers, we received a lot of feedback from the first two studies who had mentioned how being able to see employees at work allowed them to appreciate the employees more. So this was our prediction in kind of explaining the relationship between being able to see operations and perceiving higher value about the service. So to test this, we took it to online, and we used a set of videos. So participants in this study experienced a virtual food service transaction as a customer ordering a sandwich. So they were divided into one of three conditions: blind condition, partial transparency condition, and finally, reciprocal transparency condition. So those in the blind condition, acting as customers for ordering from sandwich station, never got to see the chef. So only person that they saw was another employee who took their order, who then proceeded to bring the order into the kitchen, and then once the food was ready, the same employee brought out the sandwich for customers. or for the customer. Those in the partial transparency condition only got to see the chef in the beginning and the end. So after filling out an order form, the customer gave the order form to the chef, who then took the order form into the kitchen, made a sandwich, and then brought the finished sandwich out. So in this video, the customer could not see the sandwich making procedure. In the reciprocal transparency condition, however, customers could see the chef during the entire process. So from beginning when they were submitting their order form to the end when the chef was has finished making the sandwich and giving the final product to the customer. And then we assess measures such as perceived value, which is the same 4-item scale that we had administered before. 5-item perceived effort, which basically measures how much effort customers perceive from the chef, and also how much they appreciated the chef's work. So I'll first show you the impact of condition on participants' ratings or perceptions of value. So what you'll see is that the purple and green bars are blind and partial transparency conditions. So these are the conditions in which customers could not see the chef actually making the sandwich. You'll see that these two bars are much lower than the red bar, which is the case in which the customer and the chef could see the customer could see the chef during the entire sandwich making process. The exact same set of patterns followed for perceived effort, as well as appreciation. So what these results suggest is that for customers, merely being able to see the chef in the beginning, or it doesn't really give any boost. For them, actually seeing employees at work is an important factor in boosting their perceptions of value, effort, as well as appreciation. And when we do statistical analysis to find out what the process behind this relationship between transparency and company value is, we see this following link. We see that effort and appreciation are the two drivers behind the relationship between transparency and perceptions of value. So when customers are able to see the chef at work, that allows them to perceive higher effort from the chef's part, which then leads them to appreciate the chef more, and then finally leading them to perceive higher value of the service that they had just experienced. So then what about the employees? If you recall the first set of data that I showed you, what we found is that when chefs could see customers, they made better tasting food, and also they worked faster when they and customers could see one another. So partially based on the feedback that we received from the chefs that we worked with, we predicted that feeling appreciated will play a big role in producing positive performance outcomes. So for employees, we conducted a very similar study to the one that I just showed you. So here, we only recruited participants who had prior work experiences in food service, and they again went through a virtual food service transaction, this time as a chef making the sandwich. So they watched one of 3 videos. First, those in the blind condition never got to see the customer. So person who was acting as a chef stayed inside the kitchen and only saw the employee that was handing him the order form. Those in the partial transparency condition only got to see the customer in the beginning and the end. So in this video, the chef got to see a customer when the customer brought the order form, then took the order form behind the kitchen to actually make the sandwich, and then brought the sandwich out to give it to the customer. Finally, in the reciprocal transparency condition, the chef got to see the customer during the entire process, and actually made the sandwich in front of the customer who was observing the chef. So some of the measures that we included here are their intentions of effort, so how much effort they were willing to put in to produce the sandwich. We also asked them about job satisfaction as well as feelings of appreciation, so how much they were feeling appreciated by the consumer. So what you're seeing here first is the impact of condition on their on how people rated their intention of effort to be. So you'll see that compared to the purple bar, the green and the red bars are higher than those in the blind condition. So what this suggests is that for chefs, their intention to give more effort to produce a sandwich or to produce whatever output for the customer will be higher just by merely being able to see the customer. And actually making the food or doing the work in front of the customer that has less of an impact. And in fact, we see similar patterns for job satisfaction and perceived appreciation. So first, first you'll see that merely being able to see customers allows people to experience highest degree of job satisfaction and also experience higher perceptions of appreciation from the customer. And when we do a similar statistical analysis as the one I've shown you before, what we see is that merely being able to see the customer leads them to feel appreciated by the customer, leading them to report higher levels of intended effort, as well as higher degrees of job satisfaction. So in summary, I've shown you that transparency can increase customer service value perceptions in face-to-face settings, and also improve the quality and efficiency of the service delivered by employees. For customers, I've shown you that seeing the provider at work can enhance perceptions of effort, feelings of appreciation, and also perceptions of service value. I've also shown you that for employees, merely being able to see a customer may enhance feelings of being appreciated, which can then in turn increase effort and job satisfaction. And in fact, many of our participants expressed similar degrees of thought when we debriefed them at the end of our research. So one customer actually left us a note saying, "Please leave the iPad in the dining hall. The interaction is fun. It made my day." And one of the chefs that we worked with volunteered this explanation. When the customers can see the work we're doing for them, they appreciate it, and I appreciate that. It makes me want to improve. So this is just one type of transparency that can be seen in marketplace contexts. In fact, a great number of academics, including myself, is focusing on different types of firm transparency. So I'd like to give you a brief overview on these works during the remainder of time. So some of my colleagues have been doing work on the impact of cost transparency. And what that entails is basically revealing different costs that were involved in producing a product. And what their work suggests is that when companies engage in this type of cost transparency, they actually, customers do actually appreciate this and can boost sales, having substantive economic outcomes. There's also been work that documents the effect of labor illusion. If you can recall the most recent time you booked a hotel or flight on travel websites, you may recall seeing this progress bar with a message that says, "Getting flight information." So what this work suggests is that when a website informs customers about the labor that is being put to generate a search, customers can actually prefer websites with longer waits to those that return instantaneous results, even when these results are identical. And what this indicates is another benefit behind transparency, which can signal the amount of labor that is being put into the final output that customers are experiencing. And finally, in the online space, I've also been doing some work on advertising transparency. So for those of you who are on Facebook, you may have noticed that starting a few years ago, you can view why you're seeing certain ad over others. For example, you may see that you're seeing this ad because the company wants to reach people similar to their customers. And given that there are numerous ways in which personal data are collected and aggregated, we are examining what types of ad transparency consumers find acceptable versus not, and how to mitigate this negative impact if consumers happen to find the revealed content unpalatable. So these works reflect growing efforts to study transparency given its prevalence and also given increasing demand from customers. But we believe there's still a lot of room for further exploration. For example, our findings can be explored in several domains where one's effort is hidden from beneficiaries. So these include decisions in healthcare, behind-the-scenes work in government, and also in education, where the works of service providers remain hidden. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today, and we'll turn it over to Kay.
Thanks, Tami. I really enjoyed that. It gives me a whole different perspective when I'm just ordering a sandwich. As we move into the Q&A session, for all participating, please send your questions directly through the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. As we get started, one question that I had, Tami, you mentioned that your perceived value measure was made up of those 4 items. Many of our member companies use Net Promoter Score as a key metric to kind of understand what's going on in many areas of their business. You mentioned that one of the items is willingness to recommend. Would that would be very similar to a Net Promoter Score type of question, wouldn't it?
Yes, I believe so. For the ease of presentation, I've shown you those results combined, but actually each of these items play different functions for companies. So that item particularly will be measuring word of mouth, and also willingness to purchase may have some indications of about actual sales that company can achieve. So yes, I think they would be very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting because you're actually showing that you know, how willing would you be to recommend this to a friend or colleague measure gets a significant bump from this transparency, and I just think that's really cool. Well, one of the other questions that pops up is a little bit more on the underlying mechanism and the why. So the question is, are there categories or situations, hold on a sec. I can't see the question. Are there categories or situations where reciprocal transparency might actually degrade the performance or perceptions of experience? Can you go to the other one? The other question that I was actually going to ask you first was, are there other ways that you can explore empirically why you're getting this effect? Is it authenticity, some feelings of safety or quality, perceptions of control? Have you looked at any of these? And the other one that I was wondering about, is it just a mere connection to the chef? So let's focus on that question first, right? In addition to this appreciation, have you looked at other moderators of this: authenticity, safety, quality, control, co-creation, or connection?
Yeah, so those are all, I think, appropriate factors that are relevant to this research topic. Especially, I'm really intrigued by the idea of authenticity. Because by merely implementing transparency, perhaps companies can signal something else to consumers, that they're genuine about revealing everything about their company operations, and that perhaps it can also signal to consumers how trustworthy they are. So those specifically we have not measured in the research that I'm showing you, but I would love to explore them further in future research. Authenticity, they might also be, you mentioned co-creation. That might be something else that's going on in this, in addition to appreciation, such that perhaps by being involved in the process, consumers feel as if they have voice, despite the fact that actually in any of our research contexts, they couldn't because they weren't allowed to interrupt the chefs. But this, it may actually increase perceptions of having voice or having some sort of control. And I think these are all I think the effects that I've shown you, the role of appreciation is actually really big, and that's something that we've seen across many of our other studies. But I do think that these effects are multiply determined, and those factors that you've mentioned are all very important to study going forward.
Well, I just find it so interesting, particularly in many of the contexts that you're studying where employee turnover is huge. So anything you can do to increase motivation and appreciation is really useful. We have a question that is asking more about cultural issues. So, you talked about authenticity and even this appreciation. Should global firms test these results across cultures if they're planning to launch changes to increase transparency in their stores? So you can think about a Starbucks who has stores globally, or a KFC or something like that. Any sense on how culture might influence these perceptions of transparency and these outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our data don't allow us to address that question, but if I had to speculate, I would think that value actually introducing these transparent designs may be further valued in the countries that are outside the U.S. So if you were to think about kind of a culture, like the American culture inherently values transparency, and especially with the rise of open kitchen designs, this is transparent designs are something that consumers in our country are becoming more and more attuned to, whereas this might not be the actually case in many of the other countries. So in fact, if we were to introduce transparent designs in those cultures, perhaps you may be able to see an even bigger boost, and perhaps especially in terms of generating appreciation and also perceptions of authenticity. One case in which it might not work is if actually consumers in those cultures, or also I guess in the U.S., if they don't appreciate certain parts about the things that are being transparent. So if a kitchen was really dirty, or if there was a huge misalignment of expectations and what's actually really going on behind the scenes. But I think those things have less to do with culture and more with, I think, specific business design.
Right. So we got a couple questions thinking about what you and I were talking about earlier, how this research could be extrapolated to other industries, like manufacturing of a product or providing a service, especially with the increased usage of on-site web cameras. And so I was just thinking about some different ones that maybe you could react to, a couple of them, whether it just be manufacturing or service. But Esurance, the automobile insurance company, has kind of this opportunity where you can check in and see your car being fixed. I'm wondering if it would enhance the experience of Amazon if you watched your product being picked or shipped, or with like Peapod food delivery, or even in a customer call center, if you actually created a two-way video chat. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Do you see it something that, you obviously haven't tested it yet, but you see it in the working really well in this particular context? What are your intuitions about whether it would extrapolate?
Yeah, I definitely do think that it will have implications for those contexts that you've mentioned, especially given that, as consumers, we have very little insight on how things are being delivered and how things are being manufactured. So, we have some intuition about how our food is going to be made because we ourselves can imagine ourselves in the kitchen, but less so as deliverers or perhaps factory workers or call center employees. And so especially given that, I think any sort of transparency, even if it was simply telling them the name of the employee who's delivering, or perhaps giving them a timestamp of when a thing is being shipped out, things like that, any sort of information or could add value to overall consumer experience. I can think of many other designs that don't necessarily require like kind of a live feed video. Obviously, those might be more difficult to implement in certain contexts. In food service settings, I think a live webcam makes sense. But in industries where things are a lot more automated, we could be very creative in different ways that these companies can be transparent. Another thing I can think of is maybe sending a picture or having or like uploading images about where your product is, things like that. Yeah. I guess another thing that I should add is you brought up the insurance example. Another relevant example is with BMW, where you're able to see your car being actually made in a factory.
Right.
There, you might actually not see a person behind these operations, but and I do think that the kind of this human-to-human connection is a really powerful thing, but it could also be achieved with, I think, mere machinery.
Yeah. So you might get, that's where kind of that co-creation connection might be stronger than the appreciate, right? There might be a different moderator on that. That's fascinating. Exactly. Another question that comes up, and again, I wouldn't expect that this is something that you've examined, but I wonder if you have any intuitions about it. Any thoughts on whether the perceived value effects and the appreciation effects, both from the customer and the chef side, whether or not they would persist in the long run, or do you think that they're momentary and they'll dissipate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the longest study that we run is over 2 weeks, and at least during those 2-week period, we didn't observe any significant drop in people's level of appreciation in response to different types of interventions. Anything longer than that, I think perhaps another way to think about that question is, what if they actually removed, so once you remove the iPads in one of our studies, does the degree of appreciation actually persist? And my intuition is that it will have a huge drop, so that actually once implementing transparency, removal of that transparent design could have a detrimental effect to companies. So I think that's where I might see actually it coming to harm rather than, and even if the level of appreciation doesn't continue to increase over time. Yeah.
Here's just a comment that was brought up, a related example to the BMW example and the Esurance. UPS, one of our participants mentions UPS has recently added the capability to see where your product is en route to your home. So that's kind of an additional one. Here's another question. What are your thoughts on, and you've answered this a little bit, of in other industries, will there be a different reaction from an employee to being viewed? So, would there be situations where you'd think it would be even higher appreciation, maybe an employee who's never had the opportunity to interact with a customer, or situations where it would have a lower reaction or a negative reaction, say, the warehouse versus the kitchen staff, or the dishwasher versus the chef?
Right. Oh, so that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that point particularly, but one idea that just popped in my mind as you were asking the question is perhaps the degree to which employees value their work matter a ton, in that perhaps if you have lower degree of pride, then I could say going in either direction. Either it could have a huge impact once they're able to see customers, or perhaps it makes them even feel worse about their degree of work. You could also imagine a scenario in which actually merely being able to see customers may actually prove to be a boost, but once they know that customers can also observe them, then that might actually go back to having a negative impact. But there is actually an interesting example in Japan where there used to be these workers that cleaned the railroads and the train tracks. And one way that the company decided to boost employee morale is by having them wear these brightly colored jackets. And by doing so, they were more visible to consumers, and they were able to have like a bigger pride in their work. So maybe that suggests that there may be some positive effects that can come from transparency.
Yeah.
This is relating back to the culture question that you asked. I have only been thinking about in terms of consumer reactions, but it might be that in some cultures, kind of revealing your work to customers as employees may be detrimental. So I think in that sense, actually, taking into account different cultures in which company offices are would be important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now we had a clarification question here, and I think it's on one of your slides. So it says, was there a difference in the chef's perceived value and effort if they meet with the customer just once before or after the service? Oh no, actually I see this as a different. It's the flip side, right? We know what the customer's perceived value and perceived effort is, but do we know kind of what the chef's perceived value and effort is if they meet with the customer just once?
So when chefs are able to see customers, what that impact is on their perceptions of company?
I think so, yeah. I don't know if you measured that.
So that I haven't measured, but I think given the patterns that we've been getting in other measures of appreciation and intended effort, I could imagine that they can have, it can actually boost employee perceptions about the company they're working as well. But
yeah, and I think and I think if I recall, when you did it from the food service side, the short, just seeing them right at the beginning and right at the end also had an effect for the people who had food service experience, right?
Right. So it had a positive boost. It had a positive impact on the ways in which they reported, in which they're willing, the degree of willingness to put in effort and how much they're feeling appreciated from the customer.
Yeah. Well, and you had mentioned to me that this question often comes up, and it has come up again. Do you see any downsides to this approach? You've talked to a couple of them in terms of culture, but are there any other ones that you've identified that haven't come up in our conversation?
Yeah, so the two contexts that I would love to study, which I think would be maybe a little more difficult, would be one where the perception, or where everything that's being revealed is really bad, either kitchen being super dirty or employees not behaving the way that consumers would expect them to do. So that could be one context where actually revealing something could be detrimental. Another case, which I think is more interesting, would be, and I don't have a clear idea on which direction this might go, is if consumers were to go to a really high-end place, and if you were to be able to see chefs at work, perhaps transparency there might actually be bad too, or it might also be good. But the reason why I think it might actually be bad is that consumers going to these really high-end restaurants with the thought that, oh, you're going to test something, eat something magical. And so in that, perhaps transparency can dampen their expectations and perhaps backfire. It'd be great if it didn't, especially since a lot of high-end restaurants do use open kitchen designs. So I think that would be an empirical question that my data can't answer.
Yeah, and then the title of that paper would be something like, taking the magic away.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm reminded, and I want to say, I'm gonna forget what bicycle company it was. There was a custom bicycle company that I want to say it was Zane's Bikes, but it may have been somebody else. And they basically, you put your order in, and they could send you your bike the next day. Mm-hmm. And they found that was too quick for people, so they actually had to slow it down.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually perfectly fitting with one of my study settings where people had to, in order to get a pre-made sandwich, people had to wait. And actually, despite despite having to wait, actually improve their perceptions and their reactions to the service, which I think is perhaps a signal that not all things that are fast necessarily mean good things.
Yeah, and I think that in that sense, in the bicycle example, you'd actually want low transparency about how long it actually takes to make.
Right, exactly.
People want to think it's longer. Well, Tami, this was wonderful. We had a great set of questions, and you did a wonderful job presenting. You have paved the way for other doctoral candidates to present after you. If Tami didn't get to your questions, or if there are additional things you'd like to discuss with her, we invite you to reach out to her at tkim@hbs.edu. Our next webinar will be Building a Data Analytics Orientation on August 31st at 1 p.m. With Raj Venkatesan, right? We look forward to seeing you there. Many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in our member-to-member webinar series. And Tami, thank you so much. It was great.
Oh, thank you.